Hey guys, how's it going? I'm getting kind of tired. It's after 12:30 here, but I just got through watching President Barack Obama's speech before Congress about the state of our economy and the agenda that he has for the coming years. So I made some recordings of clips of his speech and wanted to play them for you and give you my opinion about what he said and also get your opinion. I think it's important for us to be engaged in society, to be aware of what's going on. So here, let me go ahead and start from the top. This is Barack Obama talking about the passage of the stimulus bill.
I called for action because the failure to do so would have cost more jobs and caused more hardship. In fact, a failure to act would have worsened our long-term deficit by assuring weak economic growth for years. And that's why I pushed for quick action. And tonight I am grateful that this Congress delivered and pleased to say that the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act is now law.
So what we have here is a little bit of back padding and maybe a little bit of fear-mongering about how bad things would have gotten had this stimulus bill not passed. But the reality is some of us are concerned about not just how the money is going to be spent, but the size of the amount of money that's being spent, because it's almost $1 trillion of spending, which some would argue we really don't have right now. And will it really be that effective in fixing the problems that exist? Would it maybe be better for the American people to have that money rather than trust the government to spend it? But again, it's not just the way it's being spent, it's also the size. And Barack Obama recognizes that there are skeptics out there, and he talks about that in this next clip.
I know there are some in this chamber and watching at home who are skeptical of whether this plan will work. And I understand that skepticism. Here in Washington, we've all seen how quickly good intentions can turn into broken promises and wasteful spending. And with a plan of this scale comes enormous responsibility to get it right. And that's why I've asked Vice President Biden to lead a tough, unprecedented oversight effort, because nobody messes with Joe.
So, okay, basically we're told, don't worry about it, Joe Biden's on the case. He's going to make sure the money gets spent the way it should. But again, the chief fear we have here is not necessarily only how the money is going to be spent, but the huge amount of money that's being spent. And is it really necessary? And instead of really addressing that point, Barack Obama just confirms that this is only the beginning.
So the recovery plan we passed is the first step in getting our economy back on track. But it is just the first step.
So we've already seen that the Democrats in Congress have proposed another $490-some billion of new spending. So this is just the beginning. And will this really help our economy? I'm curious what you guys think. Here's another clip where he basically, well, I'll go ahead and play it. Continue.
We will act with the full force of the federal government to ensure that the major banks that Americans depend on have enough confidence and enough money to lend even in more difficult times.
So now he's going to talk about the nationalization of our banking system, which he hasn't ruled out and seems to be alluding to in this clip. There are a couple words I want you to pay close attention to in this clip, and that is force, assure, provide, and these are verbs designating the role he believes the government should play with regard to the banks. I think those are important words because it shows exactly what role he wants the government to have. I'm going to play it from the top.
We will act with the full force of the federal government to ensure that the major banks that Americans depend on have enough confidence and enough money to lend even in more difficult times. And when we learn that a major bank has serious problems,
here we go.
We will hold accountable those responsible, force the necessary adjustments, provide the support to clean up their balance sheets, and assure the continuity of a strong, viable institution that can serve our people and our economy.
So, of course, if the government is functioning in an ethical and a moral manner, that could be fine. You know, it being able to force, provide, and assure things for the private sector or a private bank. But the problem is, can we always trust the government to be ethically run and for it to be moral? And the problem is, when we cede a lot of power to the government, there's no arbiter above the government in our physical reality, in human governance, that can deal with that. If we cede them the power, of course, now if the banks have the power, then they can be overseen to some degree by people who are interested, by the government in some cases. But when the government has all of that power itself, who's the watchman? You know, the people are, but if the government gets too much power, there's not much that can be done. All right, the next clip. Let's go on with this.
This plan will require significant resources from the federal government. And yes...
And this is, of course, Barack Obama again confirming that we've only seen the beginning. There's a lot of money going to be spent.
This plan will require significant resources from the federal government. And yes, probably more than we've already set aside. But while the cost of action will be great, I can assure you that the cost of inaction will be far greater. For it could result in an economy that sputters along for not months or years, but perhaps a decade. That would be worse for our deficit, worse for business, worse for you, and worse for the next generation, and I refuse to let that happen.
So again, it's the end of the world if we don't have more government spending. That seems to be what he's saying here, that we're going to need to put out a lot of resources, and if we don't, the sky is falling. It will be the end of society as we know it. And what's his solution? Not only more spending, but more government power. Let's hear about the new regulations planned.
So I ask this Congress to join me in doing whatever proves necessary, because we cannot consign our nation to an open-ended recession. And to ensure that a crisis of this magnitude never happens again, I ask Congress to move quickly on legislation that will finally reform our outdated regulatory system. It is time. It is time.
Now, fixing regulations, making them efficient, that's good, but what we often see is a crisis like this is used as an opportunity, which we've heard that exact language from the Obama administration. The crisis is an opportunity to have more spending, to have more regulation, to get things passed that absolutely never could be in normal circumstances. So let's move on then to the next clip, which I think is a little revealing, because the impression at least I got from it is that we're told that we should rely on the government when crises hit.
I reject the view that says our problems will simply take care of themselves. That says government has no role in laying the foundation for our common prosperity. For history tells a different story. History reminds us that at every moment of economic upheaval and transformation, this nation has responded with bold action.
And he actually follows this clip in the speech by talking about government response following the Civil War, the Great Depression, the World Wars, and a number of other major crises. And it seems to me he is comparing our current economic situation with these other crises and saying that the government has to have an equal response to it, and that we should look to the government to fix the problem.